Here we are at Blackthorpe Barn. Bolly and I are going to go on a walk. My name's George. I'm one of the owners of the Rougham Estate and I've been here all my life. And I love this place and I want to try to introduce to you some of the favourite bits that I love and enjoy so much. So I'm guiding you around on a few of these walks, and so this is the first one that we're going to go on. And here we find the walk as we head on towards the Blackthorpe Barn car park, which is going to lead us to the Downs Wood as we set off on our journey. Swing round to the right here, and this car park, which now looks really quite empty, can be really full when we're busy. That's why we have to have all this space. Other times of year it stands rather like this, but it only takes a minute or two to walk across it, and then we're in something more interesting like the Downs Wood, where we're heading to now. Sun's just come out, which cheers it all up, and we can see the shadows of these low winter light casting across the path and all the trees in their winter glory. Downs Wood is now approaching on our right front, and we go in a little path to the right, perhaps 20 yards after the start of the edge of the wood. These walks are not waymarked, but if you pay attention you can see the paths, and they're clearly shown on the maps. And now, if I just turn here, we can see how the path leads into the wood. And so off we go. Sun is low in the sky ahead of us, and we've got this lovely winter's day, haven't we, which is going to be really attractive for going for a walk. Bolly keeps finding interesting things to go and smell, so we have to stop from time to time to let him do that. There are a couple of air raid shelters here in the wood which we pass, which date back to World War II, when there was an American air base here at Rougham with 3,000 airmen who all lived here, and that was an extraordinary thing for a community like Rougham with a population of a few hundred to suddenly have thousands of people from another country arriving, and that impact, I suppose, is still felt because there are mixed families now with American heritage here in Rougham, and there are people in the States who came from around here. Same story could be told in many places across the country, of course. And now our walk moves on. We swing round to the left slightly. There's a little fork in the way here. We take the left-hand one, passing this lovely old lime tree, which is here. And then an oak, and as well as that we've got a lot of trees which are much younger. There are conifer trees which were planted by my father, and he also planted a lot of deciduous trees that are here in the wood. And so this wood is sort of old parkland probably, with the very ancient trees. And then another phase of planting, which was probably in the 1950s. And then another phase in the late 1980s. So it's got different ages of trees in here. And one of the features, I think, of a wood like this is all the bramble and stuff which is growing low down on either side of the path. Bramble is actually really good environmentally, and it provides cover for wildlife. The flowers are attractive to insects, and obviously the fruit is attractive to mammals later in the season. And we sort of think of it as being rather impenetrable and a bit of a problem, but actually if you're a small mouse or something running around underneath, you're protected from probably birds or attack from other animals, but not protected from all of them, but by quite a lot. And it's shaded, and it's a way of achieving what in forestry terms we call an understory, which is basically a lower level of growth within the wood. On ancient woodland sites where we have coppice, and we've got quite a lot of that here at Rougham, but not here, it would be further south on the estate. There we have understory, which is hazel and that sort of thing, which is environmentally probably much more interesting than this. But even this bramble provides a really good resource for the environment and for the community around here. I don't always think that when I'm trying to stagger through it to get to somewhere on the other side, but one has to learn to live with these things. Our walk today is going to take us up past Rougham Church, which is a really beautiful old church, and we will be visiting that on another walk, so I won't go into too much detail, but we'll go round the base of the tower, which is really magnificent, and on a day like today I think it's going to be very special. The birch trees their stems are reflecting in the sunlight here in the wood, and as we get flashes of light, you get these brilliant white stripes through what is otherwise quite a sort of dark area of the wood. Downs Wood is about 20 acres in size, which is, I seem to remember from Winnie the Pooh, that the wood that they all spent their time in was called a 20-acre wood, so this is almost exactly the same size as that. On the estate we actually have 650 acres of woodland, so it's a tiny percentage really of the woods we've got here, and over various walks you'll discover quite a few other bits of woodland, and as time goes on maybe we will develop more walks into even further bits. Always having a smell of some of the interesting things going on. You can't help having a wee every now and again because he is a dog. When we first got him as a puppy, we used to try to guess how many wees he would do on a walk, and it was always some absolutely enormous number. And it hasn't really changed. He's got his little coat on today because it's cold, and it just about keeps him at the right temperature. As we pan around through the wood here, you can see various trees that have blown down over the years, and they represent what's called fallen dead wood, which is a really important environmental resource. It's where lots of insects live and that sort of thing. And Wally started doing some digging. I don't know what he found, but anyway, we seem to have managed to stop that one. Otherwise we might be here for a long time. And he would certainly need a bath after that. Come to a little corner in the path here, which is always rather wet. Probably one of the wettest spots on this walk. And I mean, it's not hugely wet today, but there always seems to be mud just there. So if you come on this walk, maybe Wellingtons are quite a good idea. Except in the height of summer. Now we're approaching a junction, and we turn right and head south and out of the Downs Wood. We can see the edge of the wood beginning to appear. And you can also see a very nice local man with his dog Sky, who Bolly and Sky have a rather tricky relationship. There will probably be a lot of barking when they meet. Very charming dog, but whenever we separate from them, there is a lot of barking, and you'll probably see this in a moment. Good morning. How's Sky today?
Like always. How are you doing?
All right, we're making a little film, and maybe Sky's going to feature on here.
All right.
Actually, he's doing rather well.
Yeah,
That's the best he's done.
Yeah.
Very good. Congratulations.
well, yesterday when we met over there,
Yes.
he was crazy with. We came here, there was another dog. I let him go, and they playing around here, running around, friendly like hell. Came back, everything was fine.
Right. Well, I think the leads are sometimes the problem.
I think that's
Yes.
lots of things.
Yes.
Have a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to see you. The hedge line here is giving us a bit of shelter today from the wind. It's not hugely windy, but there's a bit of a breeze, and of course because it's so cold, that's just making everything feel really quite chilly. I'm rather glad of my hat, gloves and scarf today. And we have the stream running beside the path, which always seems to have water in it this time of year. And we go a little bit further on, we'll actually see a little bridge, a tiny bridge, and you can see the water running there really rather well. Over to the left front there is Rougham Church, which we will be heading towards shortly. All the deciduous trees are now bare in the skyline, and these oak trees are now looking very stark and statuesque, I think you have to say. In front of us is a field maple, which is also in its winter dress. Seems to have got quite a lot of ivy growing in it, which creates another habitat. Some people worry about ivy growing in trees, and it can be a problem, but very often it's creating another total environment with its own flowers, food sources, insects that live on it, and so actually in many ways it's very good. It's only if it becomes hugely smothering to a tree that it's a problem. Shortly now we're going to be approaching the junction, and today we're going to be turning left and heading up towards Rougham Church as we explore another bit of the estate. But we're just going to come up to this little bridge here where the water is flowing through, and in my sort of East Anglian way of being impressed by even small amounts of water, I can't help but stop and film that just for a moment. And now we head on up towards Rougham Church. There's another tree, amazing silhouette of a tree here, another oak, growing along this new hedge line which we're about to encounter. You can see here where we've planted a few trees in the hedge, a few hedge plants, probably mainly hawthorn, a few other things, to gap up what was a rather patchy bit of hedge line historically. And we're going to be doing a lot more hedge planting along here in the near future. In fact, within a week or two, I think. This is what we mean by gapping up. You had a lump of hedge here, old hedge, and then there's a big hole. And so we've planted up the hole. That was probably 10 years ago, maybe. And then we get another bit of old hedge. And so gradually the two things will merge together and we'll end up with a more continuous hedge line, which is what we're really looking for. The old hedge here is actually really dense and wide. It's probably several meters wide at the bottom, which is wonderful. It's really, really good environmental asset, a thing like that. And it looks to me as if there might be another field maple growing here. Here we have what I suspect is another field maple, one of these smaller trees along the field line, and they're beautiful in their slightly diminutive state. Rather ignored, I think you could say, by most people, because we all tend to notice the oak trees because they're so big, and yet these minor figures in the hedge line are really good and create a diversity in the ecosystem. Rougham Church is getting closer as we go up this path. So many of the footpaths in the village radiate to and from the church, and they really are indicative of how, at the time that the footpaths became established, the power of the church and the importance of it in the social community, and people getting to and from the church on a Sunday was absolutely key to their lives. And so everybody accepted that it was all right to have paths doing this. And so these days, if you go for a long walk, you usually find you're actually walking from one church to the next, utilising the system that was set up all that time ago. I'm going to pan round now because it's really rather a lovely view as we look around in the landscape here. Now a rather flat Suffolk landscape, this little valley is really attractive, and you get beautiful sunsets over there. But today we're focusing on a walk which is going to go via this church. St Mary's Church in Rougham is a real feature on the landscape. It's got a really tall tower which you can see from miles around. I'll go into a lot more detail about it on another walk where we actually visit the church, but perhaps I could just say that personally I suspect that this church, or its predecessor on this site, was more or less destroyed in 1327 when there were some huge riots by the townspeople of Bury against the abbey in Bury, and the land here was all owned by the abbey, and so they associated the land here with the abbey, and similarly the church. And so the church here is really, I think, more or less all built after that to replace the wrecked building that happened during those riots. And as a result, I think we have an exceptionally elegant and really rather grand church, which we should be very grateful for. Rougham also is very lucky to have a really wonderful primary school which is located here beside the church, and we're not going to be filming there, of course, but you can't help but hear all the children playing in the playground, which is really lively on a day like today, and it explains all these cars in the car park. On our left front, coming up, is a series of meadows called the Spinney, which have a wonderful lime avenue which leads down to the old original Rougham Hall, which we will visit on another walk. But if I just pan the camera around a little, you can see the meadow, and in a moment you'll catch a glimpse of the avenue sitting there waiting to be visited on another walk. But today we're going this way. We have to cross the public road with a little care. There's nobody coming, no cars. And through the gate, Bolly knows his way along here. And you can see Rougham Church growing in size as we approach it. We're just going to be walking around the base of the tower and then heading off in a westerly direction. There is the tower and this amazing church. Very, very well worth visiting. The church is open, it's often open, it's in fact usually open, so it is worth coming and having a little look inside. It has the most wonderful roof and some superb brasses. We'll discover them on another walk. Now, if we pan up, we can see the top of the tower, and we are now heading in a westerly direction as we go away from the church and heading off towards the green lanes that this walk is named for. This is obviously the churchyard, full of the graves of many people that I remember, my own family in fact. But it's obviously another centre of the community. And now we're coming to a metal gate, which was put here by my brother and his friends after the Rougham Harvest Fair. And it's got initials for that on the gate, if I can find it, there we go. And it was put there in 1981 to commemorate the Harvest Fair, which happened on the spinney just the other side of the road, which we looked at very, very briefly. We have another gate to negotiate here, which sometimes slightly confuses Bolly. We have to swing the kissing gate backwards and forwards to get through, but there we go, achieved that. And the path falls down through this narrow shallow little bit of valley, and you can see it rising on the other side. And when we get to there, we're going to be turning right at the hedge line. But we should enjoy this bit of the walk first. And maybe we might have a little look at one or two ponds that we've restored as we go on our way. These are poplar trees in this line here, which were planted probably in the 1960s. See a whole row of them here on the left front. They were planted in the 1960s as a sort of cash crop, because at that time Bryant and May, the people who make matches, were looking for a supply of timber to make matches, and this was thought to be the future. The reality was, though, that with the breakup of Eastern Europe and the availability of softwood from places like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, the market for this poplar wood completely died away. And so these trees have never been cut down as they were planned to be. And they look magnificent in the landscape, but the problem with them is that they only live for about 50 years, and their timber is very soft, and they start to blow down and become quite dangerous. And we've had to start cutting down poplar trees in the landscape for safety reasons before they become more of a hazard. And when I stand to look at these ones, I think they do look really rather fine, and they're probably, because they're not along a road here, they're going to be safer for a little while, but I'm afraid they can't stay indefinitely, because they will all be blowing over. When you get an autumn gale, when they've still got leaves on, they act like sails, like any tree does. And if the trunk is not very strong, as is the case with the half-dead poplar tree, they just snap and cause real problems. And as they get bigger and bigger, they become more and more of a hazard. But where we do cut them down, we do replace them with other trees. I can now begin to see our pond here on the left, which we restored a few years ago. There were poplar trees growing around this. And one of the things about poplar trees is that they suck water out of the landscape. And they completely drained these ponds by sinking their roots in around the base of the pond and sucking all the water out to grow themselves. By cutting the poplar trees down from around the pond, we were able to restore the pond. So it seems destructive removing the trees, but actually it's let light in, which you need for a pond, and it's let the water return and create a hugely valuable environmental asset for the community and for the environment. Suffolk is a very, very dry part of the country, and it really needs these ponds for wildlife, particularly in the summer when there's a real dearth of water everywhere. And so it's our duty to try to look after these ponds and where possible to restore them, which is what we did there. Very successfully, I have to say. We'll be passing another pond fairly shortly, and I shall be interested to see if that's got water in it, because very often it's not had, even after we restored it, and that's been quite a puzzle and quite frustrating. But we'll have a look shortly. It's always a fabulous oak tree to be looked at wherever you are around here. Isn't that wonderful? This is one of Bolly's favourite walks, and we don't do it anything like often enough for him. He adores coming along here. We're approaching the hedge line, which is crossing our path, and we can turn either left or right here to discover other parts of the estate, but today we're going to be turning right and following this hedge line along, as we will do very shortly now. Right, off to the right, Bolly. Don't know whether he really understands that, but it seems to work. And here we go, catching the sun again. Is that lovely? And here is the hedge line with oaks again on our left. And if I pan round here, you can see back to Rougham Church in the valley, looking really, really beautiful. On our right front is this other pond that we restored, and I'm very curious to see if there's got any water in it. We've had such a lot of water this autumn and winter that I would be really rather surprised if it's dry, but we'll have a look. Think I can see water? Yes, I can definitely see water. That's good. That's really good. That's how it should be. You can see water in the pond. There. When you're restoring a pond, you have to try to let light into it. It's one of the most important things. As well as the water, it's the light. And you have to make sure that there aren't too many things growing on the south side of the pond, because they shade it too much. You don't want no shade. You want a sort of dappled shade with bits of sunlight and bits of shade as the sun moves round. And so we had to fell one or two things around that pond to try and achieve that effect, though that particular one didn't actually ever have any poplar trees. Little patch of bracken in the landscape here, which is usually an indication of a different soil type. Usually a sort of little sandy strip in amongst an area that's not, something like that. And ahead of us is another small bit of woodland, which is generally called Hospital Corner. And it's called that because during the war, when the air base was here, this was where they had their hospital for injured airmen coming back from air raids, of which there were many, sadly. And the hospital was located safely away from the rest of the air base to be a bit quieter and a bit less vulnerable. Now it grows conifer trees largely, not entirely, but they are quite a striking feature in the landscape, particularly in the winter, I think, when the evergreen is something that is particularly appreciated, I think. And we've got Scots pine in there. In fact, I think they're mainly Scots pine trees, which is it's a native conifer, Scots pine. When the sun comes out, as it is doing now, suddenly the whole thing comes alive. Isn't that beautiful? You can see the cones on the trees. Well, I can. Maybe you can, or maybe you can't on this film, but I think that possibly you can pick them up on this tree here. As we approach this woodland edge, we turn left. It's all a bit muddy here, but we're going to make our way up to the public road. We have to tread a bit carefully because the ground's rather uneven. Sometimes this log here lies across the path to stop people driving vehicles on here, but you can always walk round. So on these walks, that's not a particular problem. We're approaching Almshouse Road, which is really the only section of public road we really walk along on this walk. And you have to be a bit careful here because traffic does go along fairly briskly. You can see a row of younger oak trees that we planted 40 years ago. And Hospital Corner is on our right now. Beginning to become quite a fine bit of Scots pine wood. You have to keep an eye on the traffic along here because people do come along quite quickly, but I see those two vehicles have gone off down towards the church, which means we don't need to worry about them too much. And on our left front, you'll see a hedge line, which is where we're going to be walking next. I suspect once upon a time it probably did have a hedge along it, which must have got removed at some stage. But we replanted the whole thing in the year 2000 with the help of Suffolk County Council, and this has now become a new extension to our green lane system, which is what this walk is named after. Now we have a car coming, but that also seems to be turning, which is good. do have to be a bit careful here because there's a crossroads. Now there's a car coming that's also turning, so that's also good. We'll check in all directions, it's all clear, so we'll go across. And that brief little bit on the public road is now behind us as we head for the first section of the Green Lanes. And this, as I say, was planted in 2000 and it's becoming really established now. We planted the standard oaks in amongst the other trees, and the base is thickening out and it's becoming a real wildlife resource. As so often happens when you do things like this, I think we planted the two sides of the hedge a bit too close together and it's a bit dark in the middle. There's no way it's going to get moved, and I'm sure it's absolutely fine really. What we do is to look after one side of the hedge 1 year, so you can see that on the right here this has been freshly cut, and then on the left it was cut the year before. So you can see that's the hedge growth in probably 1 year. And then the third year we won't cut either side and let both grow. And then we'll probably then cut the left-hand side, so that there's one side which remains undisturbed for wildlife and birds and all that sort of thing, and the other side gets its hair cut. If we didn't do that, the whole thing would grow thicker and thicker and thicker, and eventually it would get thick at the top and thin at the bottom. And the wildlife which tries to shelter in the base of a hedge would find it increasingly difficult to do so. So you have to keep cutting a hedge to make sure that the base remains thick. Sometimes you can allow the top to grow up much taller. So we try to have a variety of hedges on the estate, different sizes. But this is a new hedge line, so we're having to sort of train it into shape by repeated cutting. Puddles here have got a little bit of ice on them, not enough to support Bolly, but enough to hear a sort of crack as you walk across it. So it really is quite a nippy day. I always feel when you get to here that you're really quite a long way from the Blackthorpe Barn psychologically, and it's great to think that you can get here so easily from there, have a totally different experience, and then get back there again, as you will see shortly, very easily also. Before this hedge was planted, this was a very open area, and the bit of wind we've got at the moment would have made this a very cold place to have walked. It was a public right-of-way and a track, so people did walk up and down it, but usually very, very wrapped up. And today it is obviously cold because of the weather, but so much more sheltered than it was, and it's so much more beautiful. And it's very satisfying to see what we've managed to achieve here. But shortly now we're going to be approaching the ancient green lanes. There's a system of lanes here. There's one called Mouse Lane. There is the puddle, famous puddle with the ice on it. The system of green lanes Mouse Lane and Whitebridge Lane. Whitebridge Lane was an old Roman road, in fact, a rather important Roman road which runs across the estate at a sort of diagonal, slightly at a diagonal, which was originally a road which ran from Chelmsford up to Ixworth, where it joined Peddar's Way, and then took people all the way up to the Wash, and then by ferry over to Lincolnshire, and then up to the north of England. So it's important. It was an important route. Here we're approaching where the Roman road from Whitebridge Lane crossed over what was the stream in the bottom of this little valley, which has now become this ditch, which looks like nothing at all really, but it does carry quite a lot of water. And at one stage the Roman road would have been almost exactly where we're walking at this moment. It now goes diagonally across the field, which is marked, actually, if we look over here just briefly, there's a couple of track lines of vehicles going across the field, and that's the old Roman road route. Now we're going into what looks like the most ancient bit of Green Lane, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I absolutely love this. It's such a secretive, sheltered, magical spot. And the hedges here are many hundreds of years old. And it's absolutely lovely to walk along. So Mouse Lane seems to be effectively two different tracks. Here we have a badger set, which seems to be expanding in this area, making a few tripping hazards, I think, for anybody walking here in the evening in poor light. So if you come along here, do take care. Sunlight coming into a lovely angle as we walk along this beautiful Green Lane. You can see here where a bit of hedge has been laid at some stage in the long distant past, and so a little bit of that shape has survived. And here you've got like coppice stools at intervals as we go along, which have all joined up. A hedge like this, we don't cut this. We don't really cut this at all. It's allowed to just grow, because this is something of another order of specialness. But it would never have created this thing if it hadn't been cut regularly in its early stages. And if we look to the left here, we can see that's Whitebridge Lane coming down there in its new form, which is with a hedge line which I planted 40 years ago. And now we head back to Mouse Lane, and there's a wonderful oak here on the right, with ivy and dead wood and live wood, thick trunk, full of all sorts of creatures. Fabulous. They say you can age a hedge line by counting a 30-metre length and counting the species that you find within that 30-metre length. And if it's not a brand new hedge that's been planted with lots of different species in it, the theory is that you've started probably with a hedge that was planted with maybe just hawthorn, and that was often how hedges were planted, because they were actually seen to be dividing features of bits of land, and then gradually over the years other species would have been introduced by, say, a bird dropping some seed or something in there, or an acorn falls in, that sort of thing. They get buried by jays, and so gradually you get a more diverse hedge. And so the theory is that if your 30-metre length of hedge, you have 4 species, the hedge is maybe something like 400 years old. It's just a rule of thumb, really. Now we come to a division in the paths, and we turn right, and this is another part of Mouse Lane. Somebody walking, coming the other way, enjoying the lovely day with their dog too. Try to keep Bolly under control. Hello. Along here you can see we have cut part of the hedge on the left, but we left the right. So dealing with a hedge is not one formula suits everything, but you have to find solutions for each individual thing. And now this Mouse Lane, this green lane, gets terrifically narrow, and that's really because I think over the years nobody's really cut it properly. And this, you can see what happens. Reality is it's rather lovely and we leave it, but the right hand side has become so thick there's almost a separate hedge growing along in the middle here with oak trees and things in it, and this holly. And some people would say that we ought to cut this out to bring it back out to its proper size, but personally I think it's really rather lovely how it is, so we don't interfere with it too much. It's just wide enough to walk along. Get a view on our left of fields and more oaks, and there's a thatched cottage in the distance which is called Hare Farmhouse. And then amazingly, down here on the left, you suddenly realise that we are really quite on a bank, quite a high bank here by the standards of Rougham, and on we go. There's something very special about a winter walk, because you get this low light level which punctuates things in such a different way from at other times of year. Something very crisp and clear on a day like this, when a walk like this becomes something that lodges in the memory, I think. Maybe not all of it, but various highlights. So the little dog's leg here in the path, and on we go again. wind is getting a bit stronger, but we're still sheltered in here from the worst of it. If there was real snow, you would find that a green lane like this would hold much less snow than either side, where the hedges would actually stop the snow drifting. And so again, within a community environment, it keeps the roadways clear, having these hedges. Now it begins to open up on the left-hand side as we're coming to the end of the Mouse Lane Green Lane system. And we're actually approaching some houses which themselves are named after it too, so they're also called Mouse Lane. And they're beginning to appear on our right. It's a lovely spot for people to live because they've got this gorgeous walk just on their doorstep. And our path just follows along the back of their gardens. I do wonder whether we shouldn't plant a few trees here on the left-hand side of this path. I've thought that several times as I've walked along here. One would have probably some low things that don't grow too high. We don't want to shade people's gardens too much. It's important to have their cooperation if we're going to do something like that, so they've got to be happy about it. The very end of the Mouse Lane track is approaching, as we can see the public road here, which is also called Mouse Lane. There's a sign saying Keddington Close on one side of it, but in a moment we will see the other sign says Mouse Lane, so everything here is Mouse Lane. There you are. Where is it? Mouse Lane, yes. And now we have to walk along here. It's a very short bit of walk. It's a pavement, so it's a good idea to stick onto that. And I should stay on this side of the road because we're shortly going to cross a public road and then go into another footpath as we head back to the Blackthorpe Barn Avenue. The road is appearing at the far end here, which is the road that goes through Blackthorpe, where the barn is located. And you do have to be a bit careful here because people do drive along here quite quickly. But we just cross the road and we go straight into a footpath on the other side, so it's only a momentary bit of traffic hazard. As you can see, there's quite a lot of traffic. We've had 3 cars passing us already. We now approach this bit of main road. Well, the main road feels like a main road from our walk, but it's actually Obviously a country lane, but quite busy. Check in both directions and then over we go. And this path takes us up to the Blackthorpe Avenue, which is about 100 metres ahead, where we will be turning right. And so I'm getting into the last little bits of the walk now, which I think has been lovely. Now ahead of us is Blackthorpe Avenue. And we're very much on the home stretch now. I pan round to the left, you can see how the avenue heads off in that direction towards the public road. And this way it heads down towards the barn. You can see people walking along here, enjoying the lovely weather. This is actually a double avenue. There are two rows of trees here. Originally, this end, the eastern end, was all limes, and the western end was all oaks. This is rather odd for an avenue, and I think they probably ran out and they had to get something else in. I suspect this was probably planted in the 1680s as part of the approach to the original Rougham Hall. Similarly to the avenue by the Spinney, which we looked at the beginning of the walk. There's been a lot of wind damage along here over the years. In 1987, when there was the big gale, a lot of lime trees came down. We have used natural regeneration to replace them as much as possible, so that we've got the essence of an avenue, even if a lot of it isn't really the original trees. There we can see one of these very, very bushy lime trees, with a bushy base. And here a hollow one without a bushy base, whose top blew out in that gale. And we're getting very close now to the end of our walk, because on our right in a moment will appear the barn, and there it is. With a car park full of cars, people in the cafe and our shop. And people going for walks, of course. So we're coming back to where we started, beginning of this little path. Some 45 minutes ago, maybe. And so here we are.